The night market in Idiwan smelled like grilled skewers and roasted chestnuts, string lights swaying gently overhead, and Leah was laughing, really laughing, head tipped back for the first time in weeks, when she collided with a wall of a man carrying 2 cups of hot cinnamon punch. Both cups went down. Both of them froze. "I'm so sorry," she said, already crouching to help mop up the mess, cheeks burning. "Don't be." His voice was low, amused, warmer than she expected from someone dressed in a suit sharp enough to cut glass. "I needed an excuse to talk to you anyway. I've been trying to think of one for the last 10 minutes. She looked up, really looked, and something in her chest simply stopped, then started again at a different rhythm. He had the kind of face people wrote songs about. Sharp, composed, achingly handsome, but his eyes, when they met hers, held none of the coldness she'd expect from a stranger this beautiful. They held wonder, unguarded and startled, as if he hadn't planned on being undone by a girl who just spilled punch on his shoes. "I'm Leah," she said, because apparently her mouth worked faster than her sense. "Ti-hyun." He bought 2 new cups without being asked, pressed one into her hands, and walked beside her through the lantern-lit stalls like it was already decided. "Tell me something true about yourself, Leah, not the easy kind of true, the kind you don't give strangers. That's a strange thing to ask someone you just met." "I don't have much patience for small talk," he said, and something flickered behind his eyes, tired, old, careful. "Life's taught me not to waste time pretending with people who might matter." She should have laughed it off. Instead, she found herself telling him about her cousin, about worry she'd been carrying alone for 2 days, about a silence from Minjai that had put a knot in her stomach she couldn't untangle, truths she hadn't said out loud to anyone, spilling out easily under the string lights, like he'd asked the exact right question at the exact right moment. He listened like nothing else in the world existed. Like her worry was the only urgent thing in Seoul that night. "I can help you find her," he said finally, quiet and certain. "You don't even know her name." "I know yours," he said. "That's where I intend to start." Neither of them noticed the black car that had slowed at the market's edge, or the man inside it watching Ti-hyun with narrowed, calculating eyes, because for one suspended, golden hour, the only thing that existed in either of their worlds was each other. Welcome to Afro Soul Stories. Please like, share, and subscribe. They walked until the market thinned into quieter streets, until the lanterns gave way to the softer glow of shop-front windows, and somewhere in that walk, Leah stopped counting the minutes. "You still haven't told me what you do," she said, glancing sideways at him. "A man who buys punch for strangers and asks for the truths people don't give away easily, that's not a normal job description." "It isn't a normal job," Ti-hyun admitted. Something guarded crossed his face, there and gone. "I run my family's company, shipping, logistics, a few other interests. It keeps me busier than I'd like, and it isn't always clean work. I won't pretend otherwise to you." "That's oddly honest." "I told you. I don't waste time pretending with people who might matter." He said it simply, like a fact of weather, and Leah felt the words settle somewhere under her ribs before she could stop them. Her phone buzzed. She checked it out of habit. Nothing, still nothing from Minjai, and the worry she'd managed to set down for an hour came rushing back into her chest. "Still no word?" Ti-hyun asked, watching her face. "She always calls. Every night, no matter what. It's been 2 days." Leah's voice thinned. "I filed a report with the police this morning and they told me to wait 48 hours. I don't have 48 hours left in me." Ti-hyun went very still, the particular stillness of a man doing quiet, fast calculations. "Where does she work?" "Export office. Pier 4 near the container terminals." Something shifted behind his eyes, subtle but unmistakable, and he pulled out his phone and typed a short message before she could ask who he was writing to. "I have people who know that terminal," he said. "Give me tonight. I'll have answers by morning." "You don't have to do that. You don't even know her." "I know you," he said again, and this time it wasn't smooth or practiced. It came out low, almost rough, like the words had cost him something to say. "That's enough for me." Later that night, he walked her to her building, refusing to let her take a cab alone, and lingered at the base of the steps longer than a stranger should have. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for all of it. I don't usually tell people things like that. Don't usually ask." Small, unguarded smile ghosted across his mouth, the first real one she'd seen. "You make it easy to break my own rules, Leah." That a compliment or a warning? "Both," he said. "Probably both." He left her his number written on a receipt because his phone, he claimed, had a habit of not surviving the week, and something about the admission, careless, human, at odds with the razor-pressed suit and the careful eyes, made her laugh despite the ache of worry still sitting in her chest. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake replaying the sound of his voice, the warmth of his hand briefly at the small of her back guiding her through the crowd, and told herself unconvincingly that it meant nothing at all. The next morning, her phone rang at 6 a.m., not Minjai's number, but an unknown one. Leah. Taehyun's voice, tight with something she couldn't name. I found her. She's safe. But I need you to come to an address I'm about to send you, and I need you to trust me completely before you get there. Heart lurched between relief and fear in the same breath. Is she hurt? No, frightened. Safe. A pause. But Leah, the reason she went quiet isn't what you think. It's bigger than a missing persons report. I'll explain everything when you're here. Please, come alone and don't tell anyone where you're going. She was in a cab within 4 minutes. The address led her to a modest, guarded house on the city's outskirts, and the moment the door opened and Minjai threw herself sobbing into her arms, every question Leah had been holding dissolved into pure, wrecked relief. I'm sorry, Minjai wept into her shoulder. I'm so sorry. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't want to put you in danger. What danger? Minjai, what happened? Taehyun answered from the doorway, arms folded, his face carved from something harder than the man who'd bought her cinnamon punch the night before. Your cousin found financial records that weren't meant to surface. Records proving Choi Group has been laundering money through shipping routes for 6 years. Records that name people who would very much prefer she disappear before she can hand them to the wrong authorities. You're involved in this how, exactly? Leah asked slowly, a cold understanding beginning to dawn, his jaw tightened. Because it's my family's shipping routes Choi Group has been using without permission, and because the man who was supposed to be protecting your cousin sold her location for 2 million won last night. His voice went flat, final. He won't be selling anyone's location again. Room went very quiet. What does that mean? Leah whispered, though some part of her already knew. It means, Taehyun said, meeting her eyes without flinching, that the company I run isn't only shipping and logistics, Leah. My family built an empire in the spaces the law doesn't reach, and I inherited it whether I wanted to or not. I should have told you last night. I didn't, because for 1 hour I wanted to be a stranger who bought you cinnamon punch and not the man everyone in this city is afraid of. She stared at him, this man who'd listened to her worries like they were the only thing that mattered, who'd found her cousin in one night when the police wanted her to wait 2 days, who was now telling her plainly that he was dangerous in ways she'd never imagined. You should have told me, she said, quiet. I know. He didn't look away. I'm telling you now, everything. If you want to walk out that door and never see me again, I won't stop you. But your cousin isn't safe yet, and neither now are you because Choi's people know your name. They know you exist. And I am not the kind of man who lets that go unanswered. A few hours later, once Minjai had been settled, fed, and finally coaxed into sleep in a guarded back room, Leah found Taehyun on the back porch, tie loosened, staring out at nothing. I should be terrified of you, she said, coming to stand beside him. You should be, he agreed, not looking at her. Most people are, and they're right to be. I'm not. Though, and I don't understand why. He turned to face her then, something raw moving behind the careful control he wore like armor. Because last night, for 1 hour, you saw the version of me that existed before all of this, before my father died, and left me a war instead of an inheritance, before I learned that being soft gets people close to you killed. His voice roughened. I don't let people see that man anymore. I don't know why I let you. Maybe, she said carefully, because some part of you didn't want to keep hiding him. Something in his expression cracked, just slightly, a fault line of feeling he clearly hadn't planned on showing anyone, least of all a woman he'd met over spilled punch less than 24 hours ago. Need you to understand what you're standing this close to, he said, low. Choi Group will not let this go quietly. There will be men looking for leverage, and you and your cousin are the easiest leverage in this city right now. I can protect you. I will protect you. But it means you don't leave my sight until this is finished. You don't get to decide that for me, he admitted, and something almost like a smile, sad and honest, touched his mouth. But I already have, and I'm not sorry for it. I'll spend however long it takes making you understand why. The evening settled around them, warm despite everything, and neither of them moved to close the distance the conversation had opened. Not yet. Not with danger still circling somewhere beyond the porch light. But something had shifted between them, unmistakable and impossible to take back. By the end of the week, Leah had, without ever quite agreeing to it, become a fixture in T. Hyun's glass-walled penthouse. Her toothbrush had migrated to his bathroom. A mug in his kitchen cabinet had quietly, silently become hers, and he never once commented on it, only made sure it was always the first thing set out in the morning. She told herself it was only until Choi's remaining men were dealt with. She was becoming less and less convincing, even to herself. He was, she discovered over the days that followed, nothing at all like the rumors that trailed his name through the city. Young T. Hyun, feared enforcer, cold-blooded heir to an empire built on fear. He cooked breakfast most mornings, badly but with a stubborn determination that made her laugh. He remembered that she took her coffee with too much sugar and never once tried to correct her for it. He came home some nights with his knuckles bruised and his eyes exhausted in ways he never explained, and still found the patience to ask about her day like it was the only thing that mattered in his. "Different than I expected," she told him one evening, curled on his sofa with a book she wasn't really reading. Different good or different concerning. He was at the counter, sleeves rolled, pouring 2 glasses of wine neither of them had asked for. Both, probably. She accepted the glass he offered, fingers brushing his. "The city's afraid of you. I keep waiting to understand why, and instead I just keep finding a man who makes bad eggs and worries about whether I'm cold." Something flickered across his face, pleasure, carefully hidden, and beneath it, an old wound she hadn't earned the right to ask about yet. "The city's afraid of me because they've seen what I'm capable of when someone threatens what's mine," he said quietly. "They haven't seen this part. I don't let them." "Let me see it, then." He set his glass down, crossed the space between them slower than he needed to, and crouched in front of where she sat so their eyes were level. "Because somewhere between spilled cinnamon punch and finding your cousin in one night instead of 2 days, I stopped being able to help it," he said, voice rough. "I don't know how to stop wanting you to see all of it, Leah, even the parts I've spent years burying." Air between them went taut, charged, the kind of silence that asks a question neither person is brave enough to say aloud yet. She could feel her own pulse in her throat, could see the same restraint straining behind his eyes, and then, deliberately, gently, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his palm lingering warm against her cheek. "I should go," he said, not moving. "You should," she agreed, not moving either. Neither of them went anywhere for a long moment, the wine forgotten, the danger outside forgotten, nothing in the world but the careful, unbearable distance between his mouth and hers, until his phone buzzed sharp and insistent on the counter, and the spell broke, and he pulled back with a low, frustrated breath. "Seung-yi," he said, reading the screen, expression hardening instantly back into the man the city feared. "Choi's people were spotted near your apartment building tonight." The warmth of the evening evaporated in an instant. The next day, against every instinct T. Hyun possessed, Leah insisted on going out. She needed groceries, needed air, needed 1 hour that didn't feel like a cage, gilded or otherwise. He agreed only after assigning 2 of his men to trail at a discreet distance, jaw tight with a worry he didn't bother hiding anymore. She was at a small cafe near the harbor, waiting for Minjai to finish a call with the lawyer T. Hyun had arranged, when a man in an expensive suit slid uninvited into the seat across from her, cologne arriving a full second before he did. "The one everyone's talking about," he said, white teeth flashing. "Young T. Hyun's girl. I have to say I don't see the appeal. You don't look like you'd survive a man like that." His eyes traveled over her, slow and proprietary. "Have dinner with me instead." "I could show you what a warm man feels like." "Not his anything," she said, cold. "And I'm certainly not yours. Leave." He didn't get the chance to argue further. A shadow fell across the table and the stranger's face drained to the color of ash before he'd even fully turned. "Kang Do Hyun," T. Hyun said, voice pleasant in the specific way that meant violence was 1 syllable away. "Choi's cousin. I wondered when you'd surface." "T. Hyun, I didn't realize. You knew exactly whose table you sat down at." He leaned in, palms flat against the wood, and the temperature of the entire cafe seemed to drop. "You have 30 seconds to be somewhere else. I'm not in a generous mood today." Kang Do Hyun fled without his coat, nearly upending a chair on his way out. Leah sat very still, pulse hammering for reasons that had little to do with fear of the man who'd left. T. Hyun dropped into the vacated seat, jaw tense, a muscle working in his cheek. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I can handle unwanted attention." "I know you can." His hand found hers on the table, not gentle so much as certain, fingers threading through hers like he'd done it 100 times before instead of once, maybe twice. That's not why I did it. Then why? He looked at her a long moment, something raw and unpracticed moving behind the careful ice of his eyes. Because the idea of another man looking at you like that, he admitted low, made me want to burn this city down. And I don't enjoy discovering things about myself in public, Leah, especially not things this inconvenient. How? Because I am supposed to be careful, he said. Careful men don't fall for women they've known a week. Careful men don't rearrange their entire security detail around someone else's grocery run. His thumb traced slow, absent circles against her knuckles. I have not been careful once since you spilled punch on my shoes, and I find I don't particularly want to start now. Word of the cafe incident reached the wrong ears by nightfall. Choi himself, furious that his cousin had been humiliated over a woman, put a quiet bounty out, not on Tae-hyun, whose retaliation everyone feared, but on Leah, correctly guessing that hurting her would wound Tae-hyun far more deeply than any bullet aimed at him directly. Tae-hyun learned of it at 11 p.m. from Seung-yi, and Leah watched something in him go glacier still, terrifyingly calm, the particular quiet of the ocean going flat and silver right before a storm makes landfall. Pack a bag, he told her. You're not staying in the city tonight. Tae-hyun, Leah, her name in his mouth, rough with something that wasn't quite anger. There's a price on your head because a man saw the way I looked at you in a cafe. I need you somewhere I can guarantee, and right now, I can't guarantee anywhere in Seoul. His voice cracked faintly on the last word, fear, finally, real and unhidden, not for himself but entirely for her. Please, don't fight me on this. She didn't. The rawness in his face silenced every argument she might have made. He drove her himself that night, no driver, Seung-yi trailing at a careful distance. To a small house on the city's outskirts she hadn't known existed, nothing like the cold glass tower he called home. Warm wood floors, faded photographs. The quiet, unmistakable ghost of someone who had loved this place fiercely. This was my mother's, he said, unlocking the door. No one in the syndicate knows it still exists, not even my father when he was alive. Bring me here. Because it's the only place in this world I've ever felt safe, he said, voice unguarded in the dark. And right now, that is exactly what I need you to be. Safe, whatever it costs me. She stepped inside, and the warmth of the small house, worn floors, soft light, a life he'd clearly protected from the war he'd inherited, undid the last of her careful distance from him. Tae-hyun, she said softly, turning to find him watching her from the doorway, something unguarded and aching plain across his face for the first time since the market. Come inside. Stay. He didn't move at first, like the invitation had knocked something loose in him he didn't know how to catch. Leah, if I stay tonight, I know, she said. Stay anyway. He crossed the room slowly, like a man approaching something he was terrified of breaking, and when his hand finally rose to cradle her face, it trembled, this man who was, by every account in the city, fearless. I have spent 11 years, he said, voice barely above a whisper, making sure nothing could get close enough to matter. And in 1 week, you've undone every single wall I built. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, breath unsteady. I don't know how to be careful with you. I only know I don't want to lose you trying. Then don't, she breathed. Be careful tomorrow, not tonight. The last of the distance between them dissolved into something neither of them tried to name. His mouth finding her slow and searching, her hands fisting in the front of his shirt like she was afraid he'd vanish if she let go. And the small house that had once been his mother's held them both in its quiet, golden dark as the world outside, Choi's bounty, the syndicate war. Every danger waiting beyond the door fell away, if only for one night, into something that felt impossibly like coming home. Leah woke before dawn to gray light through unfamiliar curtains and the warm, solid weight of an arm around her waist. And for a moment she let herself simply exist inside it. No worry, no bounty, no war waiting beyond the door. Then memory arrived, full and overwhelming, and with it came panic she hadn't expected. What have I done? She eased out from under his arm carefully, and Tae-hyun stirred but didn't wake. His face, in sleep, stripped of every careful wall he wore during the day, younger, softer, achingly unguarded. She stood there a long moment just looking at him, terror and tenderness tangled so tightly together she couldn't separate one from the other. He's going to realize this was a mistake. He's going to wake up and remember exactly what I am, a liability, a woman with a price on her head, a complication he doesn't need. and he's going to regret every part of last night. She dressed quietly and slipped out before the sun fully rose, leaving nothing behind but a note she wasn't even sure was fair to leave. Needed air. We'll call Minjai later. LIT was, she would later admit, one of the worst decisions of her life. Tae-hyun woke to an empty bed and a folded scrap of paper, and something in his chest went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He didn't panic. Panic was a luxury he'd trained out of himself years ago. But his hands, when he reached for his phone to call Seung-yi, were not entirely steady. She's not answering, Seung-yi reported 20 minutes later, having already dispatched 2 men to sweep the surrounding streets. Her phone's off. No sign of her at the bus stop, no cabs logged from this address. Choi's people. No activity reported near here overnight. This looks like she left on her own. Tae-hyun stood very still at the window of his mother's house, jaw tight, something raw and unfamiliar clawing at the inside of his ribs. He had faced down armed men without his pulse changing. He had watched his father's empire nearly collapse without losing a night's sleep. And now a woman he'd known for 8 days had walked out a door on her own 2 feet, and he felt like the floor had opened beneath him. This is exactly why I don't let people close, he thought grimly. This is exactly what it costs. But underneath the anger was something worse, fear, plain and total, that something he'd said or done or failed to say had made her run from him the morning after, that she believed, even for a second, that what happened between them meant less to him in daylight than it had in the dark. He was not going to let that stand. Leah spent the morning at a small cafe she didn't recognize, nursing a coffee gone cold, phone off, trying to talk herself out of the spiral she'd fallen into. He's a Mafia heir. You've known him 8 days. This isn't a love story, it's a hostage situation with better manners. But every time she tried to believe it, she remembered the way his hand had trembled against her face, the raw, unpracticed way he'd said, "I don't know how to be careful with you," and the lie fell apart in her hands. Minjai found her by early afternoon, Tae-hyun had called her, frantic in the careful, controlled way that only someone who knew him well could detect, and slid into the booth across from her without preamble. "You ran," Minjai said. "From him." I panicked. "Leah." Minjai's voice was gentle but firm. "Do you have any idea what he's done today? He pulled 12 men off Choi surveillance to search for you. He hasn't eaten." Seung-yi said he's been standing at that window since sunrise like a man waiting for a verdict. She reached across the table, taking Leah's cold hands in hers. "You're scared he's going to leave you the way everyone else has. I understand that. But you left first, before he ever had the chance to prove you wrong." Leah's eyes burned. "What if I'm just his liability? What if this, whatever this is only real because I'm convenient and in danger and he feels responsible?" "Then go ask him," Minjai said simply, "instead of running from the answer before you hear it." That afternoon, Leah returned to the little house on the outskirts of the city, heart in her throat, and found Tae-hyun exactly where Minjai said he'd be, standing at the window, tie gone, sleeves rolled, exhaustion carved into every line of him. He turned when he heard the door, and the relief that broke across his face before he could stop it told her everything she'd needed to hear and hadn't let herself ask for. "You came back," he said, voice rough. "I panicked," she admitted. "I woke up and I thought you'd wake up and regret me, so I left before you could say it." Something in his expression cracked, sorrow and disbelief tangled together. "Leah." He crossed the room in 3 strides, hands framing her face like she was something he still couldn't quite believe was real. "I have spent this entire day imagining every possible thing that could have happened to you, and not once, not for 1 second, did regret cross my mind. The only thing I regret is not telling you clearly enough last night exactly what you mean to me, so that you'd never have doubted it enough to run. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for being afraid," he said. "Just don't run from me again. Whatever you're afraid I'll say, ask me instead. I'll always tell you the truth, even when it isn't easy to hear." His thumb brushed her cheekbone, achingly gentle. "You can't sleep until you tell me the truth, remember? That goes both ways now." She laughed, wet and unsteady, and he pulled her into his chest, arms wrapping around her like he intended never to let the morning repeat itself. By the end of the week, the fragile peace between them had deepened into something neither of them tried to hide anymore. Not from Minjai, not from Seung-yi, not from the careful eyes of the household staff who'd begun setting 2 cups out each morning without being told. But peace, in Tae-hyun's world, was never permanent. The blow came on a Thursday evening, ordinary in every way until it wasn't. Leah had gone with Minjai to collect the last of her cousin's belongings from her old apartment. A quick errand, two of Taehyun's men stationed outside, everything by the book. She was halfway down the stairwell, arms full of boxes, when a van screeched to the curb and three men in ski masks moved faster than either bodyguard could react. She had time for one scream before a hand closed over her mouth, and the world went dark. Taehyun was in a meeting with Han Seung-yi when the call came through, and the two words Seung-yi said into the phone, "She's gone," changed the temperature of the entire room. "Gone how?" Taehyun said, already standing. Already reaching for his jacket, voice gone terrifyingly flat. "Taken from the stairwell of her old building. Both our men are down alive, but down. It was fast, professional. This wasn't opportunists, Taehyun, this was planned." "Choi, there's more." Seung-yi's face was grim. "A message came through 10 minutes ago. Choi wants the ledgers your father's company held on his laundering operation and the location of the accountant who first leaked them. In exchange, he'll return her untouched." A pause. "He gave us until midnight tomorrow." Something in Taehyun went very, very quiet, not the calm of control, but the terrible stillness of a man deciding exactly how far he was willing to go, and finding the answer was all the way. "Everyone," he said. "Every man on the payroll, every favor I'm owed, every debt anyone has ever hoped I'd forget. We're calling all of it in tonight." "Taehyun, if we hit Choi directly, this becomes a war the syndicate hasn't seen in a decade." "Then it's a war," Taehyun said, voice like iron. "I will burn every port, every warehouse, every shell company that man has ever touched before I hand over one page of those ledgers without her walking out first. He has until midnight tomorrow to understand exactly what he started." His eyes, when he looked up, held nothing of the man who'd made bad eggs and asked Leah about her day. Only the man the city had always been afraid of, finally, fully unleashed. "Find out where he's holding her. I don't care what it costs." Leah woke in a dim, windowless room, wrists bound loosely to a chair, head throbbing from whatever they'd used to keep her quiet during transport. A single bare bulb swung overhead. Somewhere beyond the door, she could hear men's voices, low and arguing. The door opened. A man she recognized, Choi himself, older than she'd expected, silver at his temples, eyes flat and calculating, stepped inside and studied her the way a man studies a piece on a chessboard. "Prettier than the photographs," he said conversationally. "I understand why Taehyun's lost his composure over you. Pity you're about to cost him everything." "Won't give you what you want," Leah said, chin lifted despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "He's not stupid enough to hand a killer leverage," Choi agreed. "But he is stupid enough to burn his entire empire down trying to get you back without giving me anything at all. I've known young Taehyun since he was a boy. He was always his father's weakness, too much heart for this business. I simply never expected to find the woman who'd finally prove it." He smiled, thin and cold. "Let's see how much of that empire is left standing by morning." He left her there in the dark, and Leah, alone, made herself a promise. Whatever happens, I will not be the reason he loses himself completely. I will find a way out, or I will make sure this costs Choi more than he thinks. By midnight, Taehyun had assembled a small army in the parking structure beneath his tower, men he trusted, men who owed him, men who feared him enough to follow him into whatever came next. Seung-yi stood at his side, having finally stopped arguing against the plan somewhere around the third hour, when he'd understood that nothing short of Leah's safe return would slow Taehyun down. "We have a location," Seung-yi confirmed, showing him the coordinates on a tablet. "A warehouse on the old Incheon docks. Choi's holding her there with maybe 15 men. It's heavily guarded, Taehyun. This isn't a clean extraction." "I didn't ask for clean," Taehyun said. "I asked for her." He checked the weapon at his hip with hands that had gone perfectly, deadly steady. The panic of the morning she'd left him replaced entirely now by a purpose so absolute it left no room for fear. Whatever soft, uncertain man Leah had spent the last week falling for, he had folded away completely, and what remained was every rumor the city had ever whispered about young Taehyun, made flesh and aimed, with total precision, at the men who had taken her. "Choi wants a war," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone listening. "I'm going to give him one he doesn't survive." In the warehouse, hours had crawled by, and Leah had used every one of them. She'd worked the loose knot at her wrists until her skin was raw, watching the rotation of the two guards posted outside her door, memorizing the gaps in their attention. When the guard finally stepped away to answer a radio call, she moved wrists free, chair overturned quietly, slipping toward a stack of shipping crates that offered the only cover in the room. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain it would give her away. She didn't get far. A hand closed around her arm before she'd crossed 10 feet, and she was hauled back toward the chair by a guard twice her size, his grip bruising. "Feisty one," he said, unimpressed. Choi said not to damage the merchandise, but he didn't say anything about scaring you a little. Outside, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of gunfire. The guard's head snapped toward the door, and for one crucial second his grip loosened. Leah didn't waste it. She drove her elbow back into his ribs with everything she had, and while he doubled over cursing, she bolted for the far door, into the maze of crates and shadows, toward the sound of chaos that could only mean one thing. He came. The warehouse erupted into controlled violence the moment Tae-hyun's men breached the perimeter. Fast, brutal, precise, Choi's 15 guards no match for men who'd trained under Tae-hyun's discipline, and were, every one of them, terrified of what would happen if they failed him tonight. Tae-hyun moved through the chaos like something out of the city's worst nightmares about him. Every rumor made real, cold, lethal, utterly without hesitation, cutting a direct path toward the room Seung-yi's intelligence had marked as her likely location. He found Choi first, cornered near the office at the warehouse's rear, flanked by 2 remaining guards who dropped their weapons the second they saw Tae-hyun's face. "You should have taken the ledgers and left her out of it," Tae-hyun said, voice low and terrible. "You should have remembered exactly what kind of man my father raised me to be when it comes to the things I've decided are mine." "She's just a girl," Choi said, though his composure was cracking, sweat beading at his temple despite the warehouse's chill. "I never imagined you'd burn down a decade of careful peace over, where is she?" It wasn't a question. Choi's mouth opened to answer, and that was the moment Leah, having navigated the maze of crates on pure adrenaline and hope, stumbled into the open space between them, disheveled, terrified, and entirely, miraculously unhurt. Tae-hyun. His name broke something loose in his chest, and for the first time since the call came through hours ago, Tae-hyun allowed himself to feel it, the terror, the relief, all of it crashing through the icy control he'd worn like armor into battle. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, hands framing her face, checking her for injuries with a desperation he made no attempt to hide. "Safe," he breathed, forehead dropping to hers. "You're safe, I have you, you're safe." "I'm okay," she whispered, hands fisting in his jacket like she needed the proof of him solid and real. "I'm okay, Tae-hyun, I'm okay." Behind them, Choi made one final, desperate move, a blade drawn from his sleeve, aimed at Tae-hyun's unguarded back while his attention was consumed entirely by the woman in his arms. Seung-yi's shot rang out first. Choi crumpled to the warehouse floor, and the sudden silence that followed felt, after everything, almost unbearably loud. In the aftermath, with Choi's remaining men either fled or subdued, and the warehouse slowly emptying of the violence that had filled it an hour before, Tae-hyun sat with Leah in the back of his car, refusing to let go of her hand for even a moment, as though contact alone could undo the hours he'd spent believing he might lose her. "I burned it down," he said quietly, staring at his bloodied knuckles. "Everything I told myself I'd never become again, I did all of it tonight, without hesitation. Without regret." He looked at her, something raw and searching in his eyes. "Does that frighten you? It should." "Doesn't," she said, and meant it completely. "You didn't become a monster tonight, Tae-hyun. You became a man who'd burn the world down for someone he loves. Those aren't the same thing, no matter how similar they look from the outside." His breath caught, visibly, at the word she'd used, loves, spoken so simply, so certainly, that it landed harder than any declaration he could have planned. "That again," he said, voice unsteady. "Burn the world down for someone you love," she repeated softly. "And I think, somewhere in the middle of all this danger and chaos, I fell in love with the man doing it." He didn't say anything for a long moment, just pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in like a man finally allowed to exhale after holding his breath for days. "Love you," he said, muffled and rough. "I loved you before I understood what that word cost people like me. I'm going to spend every day proving I was right to let it cost me everything anyway." City woke the next morning to whispers it would spend weeks trying to piece together. A warehouse raid on the Incheon docks, a syndicate boss found dead, a war that had threatened to reshape Seoul's underworld, ending almost as quickly as it began. But inside the small house on the outskirts of the city, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was the quiet. Leah woke slowly, sunlight warm across the sheets, and found Tae-hyun already awake beside her, propped on one elbow, simply watching her with an expression so unguarded it made her breath catch. "Staring," she murmured. "Memorizing," he said. "I spent yesterday afraid I'd lost the chance to." She reached up, tracing the healing scrape along his jaw, a souvenir from the warehouse he refused to let a doctor look at properly. "No more burning down warehouses for me. I'd like to grow old with you, not bury you before 35. No promises," he said, though the corner of his mouth curved. "But I'll try to keep the fires smaller." In the days that followed, the fallout from Choi's death rippled through the syndicate world in ways Tae-hyun had anticipated and prepared for. Rival factions tested the waters, wondering if young Tae-hyun's empire had weakened in the chaos. They learned quickly it had not. If anything, the ruthless efficiency and controlled fury he'd shown retrieving Leah had cemented his reputation as a man not to be tested twice. But it was what he did next that truly changed how the city saw him. He didn't hide Leah away, didn't keep her as a secret the way tradition and caution both would have counseled. Instead, at a gathering of the syndicate's remaining powers, men who had spent decades fearing the young name, he stood at the head of the room with her hand laced through his in front of everyone. "Some of you have questioned my judgment this past week," he said, voice carrying easily through the silent room. "You've wondered if a woman has made me weak. Let me be clear." His grip on Leah's hand tightened, steady and certain. "She hasn't made me weak. She's made me exact. If any of you mistake gentleness for vulnerability again, you'll learn precisely how wrong that assumption is, the same way Choi did." His eyes swept the room, cold and final. "This is Leah. She is not leverage. She is not a liability to be used against me. She is mine, under my protection absolutely, and anyone who forgets that will not get a second warning." Room understood. No one questioned it again. A few weeks later, once the last of the danger had settled into quiet and the syndicate's uneasy peace had held, Tae-hyun took Leah back to the night market in Itaewon. The same lanterns, the same smell of grilled skewers and roasted chestnuts, though this time no crowd of strangers, no watching car at the market's edge, nothing but the two of them and the golden light overhead. "You brought me back here on purpose," she said, smiling. "I did." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully, and something in his composure, normally so absolute, trembled just slightly. "Leah, I have run an empire since I was 23 years old. I have made decisions that decided whether men lived or died without my pulse ever changing. And in this exact spot, 3 months ago, a woman spilled cinnamon punch on my shoes and undid every single wall I had ever built in under 10 minutes. He reached into his jacket, and when he lowered himself to one knee in the middle of the crowded market, the string lights swaying softly overhead, Leah's hands flew to her mouth, tears already gathering. "I don't have a simple life to offer you," he said, voice unsteady with an honesty he'd clearly practiced and still couldn't quite make sound rehearsed. "I have danger and long nights and a world that will never fully let either of us rest easy. But I have also learned, because of you, that I am capable of being soft and loyal and endlessly certain about one thing. I do not want to survive one more day of my life without you standing beside me in it." He opened the small box, a ring catching the lantern light. "Marry me, Leah. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that loving you was the single best decision I ever made." She was nodding before he finished the sentence, tears spilling freely, and the small crowd of market-goers who'd noticed began to applaud as he rose and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like relief, like joy, like every fear either of them had carried finally, fully released. "Yes," she breathed against his mouth. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." By the following spring, the wedding took place in the garden of his mother's small house, the place, they'd both agreed, where everything real between them had actually begun. It was smaller than anyone in the syndicate expected, warm and unguarded in a way that surprised even Seung-yi, who stood as Tae-hyun's best man with visible, unshed emotion in his eyes throughout the ceremony. Min-jae cried through the entire vows, insisting loudly to anyone nearby that she'd known from the very first night at the safe house that this was coming. Leah wore her grandmother's hairpin, something old and cherished passed carefully into new hands. Tae-hyun, for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, wore no armor at all, just a simple suit, and an expression of complete, undefended happiness that transformed his face entirely. "Once told me you don't get to keep soft things," Leah whispered to him during their first dance, her head resting against his chest. "You were wrong." "I know," he murmured into her hair, holding her like something precious and permanent. "You proved it, every single day since that market." A year later, in the quiet warmth of the little house that had once belonged to his mother, and now belonged fully to them, Tae-hyun came home to find Leah sitting on the back porch, hands folded gently over the soft curve of her stomach, watching the sunset with an expression of pure, glowing peace. He crossed to her slowly, sitting beside her without a word, and she took his hand and pressed it gently against herself, letting him feel the small, unmistakable flutter of movement beneath his palm. His breath caught. The man the city feared, the man who had burned down a warehouse and a rival empire without his composure ever cracking, sat utterly undone on his own back porch, eyes bright with tears he made no attempt to hide. "A family," he whispered, almost disbelieving. "I get to have a family." "You built one," Leah said softly, resting her head against his shoulder. "The night you bought a stranger cinnamon punch and asked her to tell you something true. You built this, one honest moment at a time." He turned, pressing a kiss to her temple, then to her hand still resting over the quiet miracle growing beneath it, and the last golden light of evening settled over the little house on the edge of the city. The house that had once been the only place he'd felt safe, now filled, finally and completely, with everything he'd once believed men like him weren't allowed to keep. The war was over. The empire was secure. And the boy who had learned at great cost that soft things get used against you had finally, fully unlearned it, one honest morning, one shared cup of coffee, one unwavering vow at a time. "You can't sleep until you tell me the truth," he had told her once in the rain that never came, in a story that began instead with warmth and lantern light. She had told him everything. And in return, he had given her a lifetime.
Our next video is even more romantic. Don't miss it. Turn on notifications right now and get ready for the official trailer. Stay tuned.
She came to Seoul with nothing but a suitcase and a refusal to be afraid. He was the name no one said twice. What started as danger became... I will burn every warehouse to the ground. Love conquered the Mafia, but peace never lasts long for a king with everything to lose. I will burn every warehouse to the ground to bring her home. But peace never lasts long for a king with everything to lose.